When it comes to life responsibilities, I am seemingly shackled with being a university student so I can be allowed to get hold of a decent job. Or at least I think that's the idea I'm being sold on. Just to get this out of the way, but I'd appreciate it if you could do the stuff the algorithm likes to support getting more videos in the future. It's a win-win for both of us, so you'll feel better when you unsubscribe or dislike. Thanks for coming by, and please enjoy the video. Nintendo's a company that I have a bit of a strange relationship with. I have strong memories of playing on the DS and the Wii. The games that I played on my own system were kinda limited, but obviously I've already played Wii Sports, and there was also Balls of Fury, No More Heroes, and Little King Story, discussed in my very first video essay. The voiceover was done while I was practically sleeping, and I don't really wake up until like halfway in the video. I was really excited to put out that video, but I should have taken a bit more care with the audio, admittedly. But the more varied selection of games I played were at my cousin's house. He had just the most spectacular collection of games, and I want to attribute my curiosity about a lot of franchises to the way I practically sampled a lot of stuff while I was playing at his place. He introduced me to Mario and Mario Galaxy, Mario Kart for the DS, and the new Super Mario Bros. Remake that they had on there as well. I was introduced to Sonic through Sonic Colors. That was really cool. Animal Crossing was very boring to me at the time, but now I've got over 100 hours on the Switch because I grew to realize that this is the type of game that you really had to spend time with so you can actually see the fruits of your labor. It's crazy to think that my cousin and I bonded a lot over the DS. I got mine a little while after he did, probably because my parents thought that I was jealous, and he showed me a lot of cool stuff on there. Later on, he got the 3DS, which I found pretty cool, but I never really asked my parents for it, which I'm not really sure why, to be honest with you. There was also Bakugan, Blazing Teens, and Beyblades that were another set of stuff that we bonded over, and it drove our parents absolutely crazy. I want to take a second to thank my cousin, to be honest. I won't forget any of the stuff he introduced me to. I'm getting very sidetracked here. Maybe later on I'll make a more detailed personal video that talks about how I grew up on games. After that, it was a very big gap of no Nintendo, but before that I played a whole lot on the PS2, and after the Wii I got hold of an Xbox 360 before moving on to the PC and PS4. Fast forward a few years and there was this weird yearning towards getting back to Nintendo that materialized in me getting a Switch 2. You may or you may not ask, why did you get hold of a Switch? I'm just gonna say it felt logical to me. Like, if you have a PC, any quote-unquote Xbox exclusives will be there on day one anyways. Any PlayStation exclusives just come out like 6 months to a year later after their original release, so they're just relegated to being limited time exclusives nowadays. Nintendo though have desperately hung on to their guns and have not once considered their exclusive, which leads us into today's video. Unless it's in front of Goichi Suda, No More Heroes is freed from Nintendo by them. Metroid is a franchise that I've been intrigued by for many years and never really gave it a chance up until recently, but there was this one memory which was a brief flash of when I tried playing it on the DS at some point, and I have this habit of chasing after threads from my childhood aggressively up until I actually am able to make connections because I don't want to forget anything. The atmosphere, setting, and gameplay of Metroid are very different from anything I've ever experienced on a Nintendo system, which really stands out to me since you don't really think of Nintendo for having darker games, which is why No More Heroes really stood out so much to me, I think, and also because it's my first, really violent game, admittedly. Many years later, and a tiny bit of growing up in the process, I grew to love horror games and the archetype of the armored hero. I immediately think of Doom's Doom God, which makes a lot of sense since he can be attributed to the revolution the industry experienced in the 90s and the early 2000s. His presence was so powerful that companies had to implement anti-Doom software just to make sure their employees weren't playing the game on company time. Add to that the media falsely blaming the game for the call, discussion around the game blew like hellfire. Doom is a cultural phenomenon like no other, which led to the development of Master Chief from Halo, which the first level of that game is a tribute to E1M1, or pays some homage to it. You're able to see parallels between the two games here in this video. Now that entire segue leads us here with Metroid. The franchise deserves a lot of respect, and I feel the need to point out its DNA in a lot of games that are significant to us. Metroid was heavily inspired by Ridley Scott's Alien, which is very influential in its own right. The tone is adjacent to the film in the sense of isolation that it creates. Hang on a second, that's the wrong game. The game attempts to carry the tone through how you're meant to explore this map alone in a very dark environment while surrounded by different monsters and threats. I don't want to rehash everything I said in my Silksong video, but Metroid is essentially the maternal half of the Metroidvania genre. In essence, one big interconnected map, permanent upgrades as you explore, and all that good stuff. Hollow Knight and Silksong are not the pinnacle of the genre, you're glazing it way too much. Anyways, let's take a look at the heroine of Metroid and Samus Aran. Now, Samus is one of the most important heroes in game history, as one of the first female leads in a video game. This was a huge shock to players at the time, since the internet wasn't really around to spoil people on stuff, and even the manuals referred to Samus as being male. This reveal was unlocked in an ending by completing enough prerequisites before finishing the game. Underneath the armor, her original design was modeled after Sigourney Weaver, who plays Ellen Ripley in Alien. But later on, as the games got more elaborate, the design translated into being based off of Kim Basinger. Later down the line, she was given a new appearance which is familiar with players who learned about her through Smash Brothers or any other games that featured her. Add to that, Samus in her Zero suit is listed as 6 foot 3 inches tall, and she weighs in at 200 pounds. She is a complete unit of a woman. Put her in the UFC and have her get to bantamweight somehow. I promise you, Dana, it would be absolutely worth it, trust me. There's also this fan-drawn concept of how modernized Samus could look like, which I think is a pretty solid idea. I really do like the nods to her origins with the Chozo accessories that she's wearing. Now, if you can't tell, I think Samus is pretty awesome. More than that, I am in love with Samus, and the M in Metroid stands for Mido because she wants me. Aside from that, Samus's DNA as the armored hero archetype in video games has continued through Doomguy to Master Chief to Isaac Clarke of Dead Space, and if you're really willing to hear me out here, Gordon Freeman from Half-Life. In short, Samus Aran has directly inspired a lot of characters and indirectly inspired even more, so I feel pretty compelled to talk about Metroid. Which leads us into the main topic for this video, the games I played ahead of Metroid Prime 4. The only things that were directly available for me to play was Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered. Lucky for me, I'm gonna say for the jump that these are a great pair of games, and I'm a little sad that I didn't get to play more of the series for this video, but that's okay. It at least keeps things consistent. I don't have to switch consoles aggressively within the same video. Metroid Dread is the first of the 2 games I've played. Now, looking back into the history of the game, it was a bit of a miracle that this game happened, as the fan base was on fire when they found out that they were getting a new 2D Metroid, since the last 2D Metroid they got was a remake of Metroid 2. So to touch on the gameplay, you start with a very basic set of abilities in all these games, and with Dread you start with a smaller amount of rockets and your arm cannon. Samus essentially lands on a planet, loses all her abilities, and is placed under conditions that need her to get her abilities back and get away from this planet. Get used to this premise because that's literally how every Metroid goes from what I understand. Visually the game looks great, but I think it suffers a little bit from a thing that Switch games did, which is making characters look like amiibos. You land on a planet that has a lot of different environment. You have icy caves, hot caves, ocean cave, collapse cave, lab cave, city cave, and finally upper ground cave. What's also really cool is the way backgrounds and foregrounds are defined. There are some moments where you walk into a zone and you're like, what was that? And a little paranoia kicks in and you get checked in therapy. But the movement in the game is what really enhances the experience. Just the way Samus can kick off walls and flip is really cool to look at. Additionally, there's a slide that you can use to quickly move through tighter spaces, and the morph ball is kept a little while into the first region, which makes the movement feel very cohesive in the early game. Parrying has been brought back from Samus Returns in a more polished way where you can do it while you're moving rather than just standing still. This is done by you pressing the button when you see the flash and then boom, cool animation with a cooler follow-up critical shot animation. A couple of other really cool abilities you get hold of later are the Phantom Cloak and the Spider Magnet, which replaces the Spider Ball. And then the different suit upgrades in the game, which give you progressing resistances for you to keep exploring. These mainly include the Varia suit and the Gravity suit. The game will let you collect different extensions which will be helpful in your run, namely to your rockets and your health, and later on the hydrogen bombs you keep conveniently in your suit. Some of these puzzles had me thinking quite a bit on how I can reach them, especially the more complicated movement puzzles that needed timing and precision. Those felt really rewarding to go through after you figure it out, especially this puzzle I had to solve with this Shine Spark ability. The mood is generally tense, but it's surrounded by a sense of intrigue and adventure as you explore the planet. The loneliness in the game is a very distinct feeling, and it's also enhanced by the fact that Samus does not say a word throughout the entire game. She's a strong, silent type like Gary Cooper, much like a lot of really cool heroes, and her actions do a lot of the talking, with her body language and the occasional shot of the eyes telling you all you need to know. Any and all voice lines or conversation is used very sparingly to make it stick with you. Metroid focuses a lot on keeping you in motion, which makes exploration and combat really fun, but everything changes when you enter these rooms. The rooms are all sterile, deathly quiet, and then you encounter them. The EMMI zones will slow down the game's pace from a Metroidvania where you can blast and explore through the environments without too many threats to turning into a literal horror game. The atmosphere in EMMI zones are just amazing, with the soundtrack just cutting and going to a consistent track that's a lot more quiet and in line with a slowed down heartbeat. The tension is raised and it's up to you to navigate where you need to be before they can catch you. Enemies are mechanical hunters that will relentlessly go after you if they see you. They can't be killed by Samus, and if they catch you, you're given a split second to react in a merciless parry window or it's an instant death for you. Everything about these things is so imposing, while they're not really that intimidating. Their movements are just so fast and inhuman, and there aren't any flaws in their motion. They're just purely designed to hunt you down. The design in a nutshell isn't that scary. They look very unassuming, but their purpose alone and how they execute it is enough to create that fear. In gameplay, you'll also see if you get grabbed up by these enemies that Samus kinda has a bit of panic and desperation in her body language that shows that she's just looking everywhere for an opportunity to escape. It was really interesting what they did here. Addition, the sound cues on the soundtrack tied to the enemies when they spot you signals quite literally everything in your mind to run. It plays on your fight or flight response by letting you know that you have no chance. So after some stealth and exploration, you navigate these areas and you'll find a mini boss in them, which grants you access to the Omega Cannon, which gives you a single fighting chance to take down this EMMI. Now to actually kill this EMMI, you need to create appropriate distance between Samus and them so you can aim for the head. From there, you slowly melt off or shatter their armor before you charge up a headshot that allows you to deal the finishing blow. Once you use it on an EMMI, it's gone until you can find the power up again in a different EMMI zone. All of this needs to be done while you're still equally vulnerable to them, so the pressure can add on very quickly. I love the EMMI sections to death. They just really appeal to the part of me that's into horror and thrillers. The rush you get out of escaping and destroying an EMMI is amazing, and the sound design behind those Omega Cannons is just marvelous. It's just such a masterfully executed concept of going from hunter to prey and surviving enough to outsmart them and become the hunter again. The idea is so simple, but it takes a lot of finesse to get it done right. Destroying EMMIs in those zones just turns them into safe areas for you to be able to just freely walk through, but eventually they get infested with enemies. The reward for destroying EMMIs just gives you weapons or abilities that allow you to actually navigate the rest of the game. So there's a lot of areas that would be inaccessible for you unless you actually beat those EMMIs, so they're mandatory and you absolutely cannot skip them. The bosses in the game are very fun, and each of them come with a good degree of challenge, and that's the cool thing about Metroid games. They require a little bit more in terms of attention, thinking, and reflexes, but I think it's a very pleasant challenge. A really nice touch to these bosses are these original God of War type segments in the boss fights. Like, they're really cool animations between phases. They're just a blast to watch. I really did enjoy this kind of stuff. The attack and parry windows are absolutely merciless on hard difficulty, and those of you looking for a challenge will be very satisfied. And for those of you who don't really value the integrity of your nerves and mental health, there's a one-shot insta-death mode after you're done with the game. And like, for the first time in my life, I'm not really opposed to trying this one-shot insta-death mode. Like, I usually reject this kind of mode, but I really had a lot of fun with this game. Something I really appreciate about the game is that nothing feels like a gimmick, and you actually need to think where you need to use your tools so you can actually progress. You're also given some advantages with these new abilities, so don't be afraid to experiment. The enemies that you encounter after you gain these abilities are actually terrified of them. And the progression of power makes sense for the story, and it feels great to play as Samus with a complete suite of abilities. I would have liked to play a little bit more as this complete Samus. I feel like the game didn't utilize it enough. Like, it would have been great to just get an extra 30 minutes with that. That would have been pretty good to experience, but I'm probably just nitpicking here at this point. For those of you worried about the story of Metroid and don't really have an idea where to start, you won't have missed a crazy amount, because this game does explore Samus' past enough to a degree where you're able to understand her abilities better, but not everything to a point where the intrigue behind her is just gone. Another thing I really liked was the suit design and the color scheme they started Samus with for the game. From what I understand, this suit is like an interpretation of what was used in Metroid Fusion. With a lot of older titles, I think that they go for like a bulkier and beefier approach with Samus' armor, but I like the slimmed down and sleek approach that this one has. It just looks really cool. And the details that they were able to do with the Switch are just really impressive. Just look at how the plates move around her boot, and it makes it feel like a lot more alive than just being a bulky, beefy suit of armor. It's really interesting, and it feels like the suit moves organically with Samus. It's really nice. The progression to the suit also is really cool to see as well, since there's always like a visual indicator for you to look at and remember that you have a new ability to use. Beating the game is very satisfying, and the handheld experience on the Switch is really fun, so definitely give the game a go at some point if you can. More sales mean more 2D Metroids, and I need more, especially if they're at this standard of quality. In short, Metroid Dread is an incredibly good game, and I'm glad to have finally gotten into the series. I really don't know how to recommend this game any further. It's just one of the best Switch exclusives. It's stupendous stuff. Like, it's marvelous. Just go play it. Alright, now, okay, so Metroid Prime Remastered. My voice is giving out at this point in recording the review. I think I'm starting to get sick, I'm not gonna lie. But it's okay, I really want to put this review out before Prime 4 releases. Yeah, the game's already out, don't even worry about it. So this is a remaster of 2002's Metroid Prime, which originally launched on the GameCube. I personally haven't played the game on there, so I'll be reviewing it as it is on the remaster, but this could be a matter of conflict between people who played the original because they might prefer that one. I think one of the bigger things to note about the remaster is that it mechanically works the same, save for a few changes in how projectiles are fired because of the control scheme. It basically defaults to your standard first-person shooter controls that Halo kind of set the standard for, so you know, LT to aim, RT to shoot, that kind of stuff. I did give the motion controls a try, but I don't like them. I think I almost got carpal tunnel because of it. So from a gameplay perspective, Metroid Prime is literally just a first-person Metroidvania, which becomes very interesting as you progress throughout the game. The progression and how you gain abilities is very similar to what I described earlier in Dread, but I think what's really interesting is that you start with everything you're supposed to have in a tutorial section that leads to the start of the game. So you get an idea of what you're missing later on in the game. For example, you did something in the tutorial section, then you encounter something in the main game and you're like, oh shoot, I can't play Super Monkey Ball for the GameCube trademark. Oh yeah, and there isn't a character that babysits you and points you to what you should be doing. Alright, so there's one thing I've been rushing to discuss, which are the visuals and the atmosphere of this game, specifically in the soundtrack department, which really made me kind of squint and look at the case I have for Metroid Dread. Because in all honesty, I had to think a little about the music I was using in that review section. I'm not sure why, but the soundtrack didn't really stick out to me in Dread as much as it did for Prime, which is such a shame because I profoundly loved everything about it. Had the soundtrack stuck out a little bit more to me, I'd have been an extra bit more enthusiastic to discuss the game, which is saying a lot. Even though Dread's atmosphere is great, I think it's missing the consistent finesse that Prime has. A couple of reasons I'm trying to attribute to why I didn't think much of Dread's OST could maybe because I was too fixated on the gameplay and the challenge behind it. But now that I think back on it, the sections where you're not in gameplay, in Dread I mean, you're rewarded with those cutscenes, and there are some encounters other than the EMMIs where I'll remember the tunes for. But the game familiarizes you with the Metroid motifs, they're always great to hear, and the cutscenes are a lot stronger in Dread than in Prime, I think. There's a good bit more cinematic finesse, and the expressions that Samus has are always great to see through the visor since you get a little bit more emotional insight. So in essence, what does the Metroid soundtrack offer in between gameplay, Mercury, Steam? We have hype moments and aura. But Prime's OST? The focus between Dread and Prime's soundtracks go from intense action and hypothalamus hyperstimulant to Metroid beats to relax and discover local flora and fauna. In addition to those action-heavy tracks, and speaking of action-heavy, you guys remember when Modern Doom was really good with Eternal in 2016? The modern trilogy of Doom games was kind of inspired by Prime's exploration and maybe a little bit on the combat. I think one element that really carried over between the games is how you're incentivized to target weaknesses with different weapons. I think the goal of this was just to teach the player to be more efficient with resources. Obviously the pace of Doom is a lot more intense, but between a couple decades of industrial development and technological advancement, I think you'll be able to see the similarities when I switch between these shots. Oh my god, Doom 2016 was almost 10 years ago. Maybe a video on the modern trilogy next year could be good. The exploration in this game uses a system of what Doom would later on adopt to become the auto map. I think it really does look like it. Even the mechanism to how Samus gets hold of the map is like the same of what Doom Guy eventually goes on to use in those games. But one major complaint that I have is that items don't get marked down for you once you discover or scan them, so I had a rough time remembering where stuff was scattered after I finally gained new abilities that allow me to reach them. I believe the game does have that capability because they just mark down the doors with those different color codes that you need for the guns to open them, essentially. And I think it would have been a pretty good quality of life feature where you can just mark down the items that you missed and go back to them later when you finally have the ability to approach the challenge or whatever is locking you behind. I don't believe it would hurt the integrity of the original experience. Quite the opposite, I think it would actually enhance it. I think you'll feel less of a need to actually look up a guide so you can reach a higher completion rate for that unmasking cutscene. It's been upgraded quite a lot since— oh my god, why are you blinking like that, Samus? The visual tone of Prime really contrasts in an interesting way against Dread's borderline animated show kind of approach. Prime is closer to a realistic for the time setting, and even looking at the visuals from 2002, they age quite well. All the elements of the presentation come together to make for the most immersive Metroid experience and even the most immersive Nintendo experience. And the attention to detail they paid with the little things like how the flash from explosions and nearby lighting can show a reflection of Samus through the inside of the visor. This wasn't just a detail that would just be a PNG looking at the camera, like this was an active model that would be on screen for these brief few moments and she'd flinch and blink sometimes. She'll actively be looking at where your cursor is, especially if you're using a more sensitive control scheme, and this is all really cool stuff and it carried over from 2002, which speaks to how well the game aged. Enemies also have different behaviors depending on how you tackle them. For example, larger enemies that you beat have a chance to do one last attack while they're down, which could catch you off guard if you're not careful. There's also the dive that the flying space pirates have, which can really throw you off if you're not careful, but they'll tell you about it. Like, this kind of behavior is told to you when you scan those enemies and add them to your entries. Another thing I really want to commend Prime on is just how well optimized the game is. Apparently, Retro has a track record of taking care of their projects, and the game ran at a consistent 60 frames per second for every version of the Switch. All this was done while maintaining a higher visual quality and fidelity, and I think these guys are just wizards for optimizing for the Switch, which is pretty encouraging. I gave the different control schemes a go just to try it out, but admittedly I've done it too far into my playthrough to actually get used to anything other than the default scheme. The alternative control schemes would be viable if you're willing to play in an unorthodox method by today's standards. Overall, I think Metroid Prime stands as a very strong title that's worth visiting. And to conclude on this pair of games, I think they're absolutely worth your time and helped act as a system seller for the Switch outside just the popular IPs that Nintendo is known for. Metroid's got a lot more to offer to me in terms of challenge, and I believe that Dread might be like one of the top 2 Switch exclusives, probably my favorite. And Metroid Prime that stands very well to this day with a very good level of polish behind the remaster. And it's a very good milestone in terms of seeing how far games have come, and it's a great reminder that you actually don't need to always play the newest titles to have a lot of fun. Just put on. Yeah, exactly.
It looks so stupid on the table.
While I am now a fan of Metroid, I'll be playing Prime 4 a little bit further after launch because I have exams to go through. But I profoundly hope I won't be disappointed because from what I'm seeing, it's just made for more mature players and I don't want to see it devolved into a mishandled nostalgia-bait franchise. Metroid isn't the bestseller by Nintendo standards, but it seems like it does well with sticking to its niche and maintaining a higher quality output with its games. My concern is that Prime 4 is going to fall too hard into the Marvel humor pitfall and just kill the tension and atmosphere. A lot of games are terrified of the prospect of unnerving the players, so they added this dork to kind of relieve the tension when it's the complete opposite of what Metroid is at the core. One of the worst outcomes that can come out of Metroid Prime 4 is that they create this perversion of the series where you can create a movie franchise about it because there's now a cast. From that point, hype gets created around this series because of people associating the cast with being more popular, I guess. And at the core, you're gonna have people who kind of were around for Metroid but didn't really appreciate it back then, just go like, oh, I remember Metroid, you know, that game got a movie now? And that's just miserable to me because you'll lose the essence of what made those original games really good. And from there, the Metroid movies will just get reduced into simpler action movies rather than lonely experiences where exploration is the priority. That was kind of a pitfall that people didn't really enjoy the Prime series falling into with Prime 3 from what I understood and the research I've done. So I don't understand why they're trying to hit their heads against a brick wall knowing it already failed once. I've got a lot of appreciation for what those games have accomplished, but I think I'm just a tiny bit out of my depth here, but I'll throw my 2 cents on the topic anyways. A lot of creators or fans have this severely intense attachment to Nintendo franchises to a point where it extends beyond just having an appreciation for the games that shaped them towards just living for escapism.
Pardon my voice if it sounds a little different. I am a little bit sick at this point in the recording, but anyways, that's where I feel it's a little unhealthy, because it allows companies to prey on their attachment to just sell them an infinite pipeline of low quality product without any backlash, because these people can still earn money and pay for their garbage. You guys know the archetype I'm talking about here. Now, the problem with creating no high quality output throughout all generations of players, not consoles, is that you don't get an audience that's grown up with a franchise to be genuinely excited for, which is where Metroid failed in the marketing franchise in the early 2000s. They could have focused more on creating more Metroid titles that are familiar with us, but instead they pivoted towards other IPs, which is fair enough. It made them a lot of money.
The Metroid games have so much polish put into them, and I think it's a shame that they're the least selling, especially when they're so well made. Nintendo has managed to put a Switch into every house, and for comparison's sake, Dread was the peak of the series at 3 million copies sold, with Prime Remaster selling about 1.4 million. Now those are numbers, but when you take into account Mario Kart 8 at 60 million units sold, or Animal Crossing at 45, and other franchises that sold high numbers, and at the least you have Kirby and the Forgotten Lands, which sold 6 million copies. Those numbers are what Nintendo are looking for, especially with lower capital investments like Pokemon, which seem to sell like crazy no matter how little money they put into it. Now that could all change with the release of Metroid Prime 4 since it's getting quite a bit of marketing on Nintendo's part, so it's not impossible that it'll result in a bit of a renaissance for the series. But I'm honestly hoping that the quality of the game isn't going to be bad since the marketing material kind of concerned me from a tonal perspective. I'm really new to the series, but I can tell from the jump that it's not meant to have characters this talkative, and the mood isn't quite the same without the sense of silence that we got in Dread and Prime, as well as the older titles. I'm sure the gameplay is going to be solid though, but I do want it to be satisfying enough of an experience for me to go after a face reveal, and that model better look amazing. One of the worst outcomes from Prime 4 is that it becomes too digestible and it becomes a game for everyone. Remember boss, a game for everyone is a game for no one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next one where I talk about a woman that put me on a collision course to becoming what I am when I was a kid.